While I was on a business trip in Dallas, a bank employee suddenly called me, "Your wife is here with your son, and they are requesting a large withdrawal from your account." I froze. "Wait, did you say my son?" She answered, "Yes, sir." My heart stopped because my son had died 8 years ago. I immediately rushed back to the bank, and what I saw through the glass left me completely speechless. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories. I'm so grateful you're here. Where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Also note this story contains fictional elements for entertainment and learning. Any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental, but the life lessons are entirely worth it. The photograph on my phone screen had not changed in 8 years. Daniel at 23, standing in the driveway of our Houston home, squinting into the afternoon sun with that crooked grin he got from my side of the family. I kept that picture as my lock screen because some mornings when the Dallas hotel rooms felt too quiet and too white, I needed to see his face before I could make myself get out of bed. It was a Monday in October, and I was sitting at the small desk near the window of my room at the Adolphus Hotel, finishing the last of a cold cup of coffee and reviewing freight contracts for the quarterly audit. The cursor blinked on my laptop screen. Outside Commerce Street was loud with afternoon traffic, yellow cabs nudging through intersections, a food truck sending the smell of grilled onions up 4 floors. I was supposed to drive back to Houston the next morning. Nothing about that afternoon felt different from any other. Then my phone rang. The number on the screen was one I recognized immediately. First Lone Star Bank, Houston branch. Veronica Shaw, Senior Branch Manager. She had managed our primary accounts for 11 years. A careful woman, professional. She did not call without a reason. I picked up on the second ring. "Veronica, everything all right?" There was a pause on the line. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But I have been in business long enough to know that a 2-second pause from a careful woman means something is wrong. "Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was lower than usual, measured in a way that told me she was not alone at her desk. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I need to inform you that your wife is currently here at the branch. She came in about 20 minutes ago." I leaned back in my chair. "Evelyn's at the bank." "Yes, sir." Another pause. "She's at the executive service counter. She came in with someone. A man." Veronica stopped. I heard her draw a slow breath. "Mr. Hayes, she introduced him as your son, as Daniel." The coffee cup in my left hand tilted. I caught it before it fell, but just barely. I set it on the desk carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped trusting themselves. "I'm sorry," I said. "Could you say that again?" The gentleman with her presented identity documents under the name Daniel Hayes, claiming his official records were recently restored, and Mrs. Hayes verified him as your son. Veronica's voice dropped another register. They presented signed transfer forms requesting a complete withdrawal from the primary trust account. "I have not processed anything yet. I wanted to call you first." I stood up from the chair without deciding to stand up. My body did it on its own the way it used to in the early days of running the company, when a supplier called with a crisis at 2 in the morning and my feet hit the floor before my brain caught up. "Veronica?" I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Do not process anything. Do you understand me? Nothing moves. Not $1. "Understood, Mr. Hayes. Absolutely nothing. Keep them at the counter. Tell them there's a system delay. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. But keep them there." I was already pulling my jacket from the back of the chair. "I'm driving down right now." "Of course, sir. I'll handle it." I ended the call and stood in the middle of that hotel room for exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. 4 seconds where the only sound was the traffic outside and the hum of the air conditioning unit beneath the window. 4 seconds where I held the phone against my chest and felt something cold move through me, starting at the base of my spine and spreading outward until my fingertips went numb. I buried him on a Thursday in November 2017. I stood at the graveside in a black coat in 40-degree weather and held a white rose that I couldn't bring myself to drop into the ground for 11 minutes. Pastor Glenn stood beside me. Evelyn stood 3 feet to my left. The funeral home director kept his eyes down. I remembered the sound the dirt made. I remembered it for years afterward, lying awake in the dark. I grabbed my car keys from the desk, shoved my wallet into my jacket pocket, and walked out of that hotel room without closing my laptop, without finishing the contracts, without calling anyone. I took the elevator down to the parking garage and got into my car. The engine turned over on the first try. I pulled onto Commerce Street and pointed the hood south toward I-45, toward Houston, toward whatever was waiting for me at that bank counter. The interstate opened up past the city limits, and I pressed the accelerator down harder than I should have. The speedometer climbed past 75. The flat Texas landscape blurred on either side of the highway, brown grass and power lines, and the occasional overpass cutting across a gray sky. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and kept my eyes on the road ahead. 8 years. I had grieved that boy for 8 years. I had sat in the front pew of St. Paul's on the anniversary of his death every single year, and listened to Pastor Glenn read from the book of John, and told myself that grief was just love with nowhere left to go. And Veronica Shaw had just said his name like he never left. The drive from Dallas took 2 hours and 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on this dashboard the entire way down, checking it at every mile marker, like the numbers might change if I looked away long enough. The afternoon sun had dropped behind a line of clouds by the time I crossed the Houston city limits, and the skylight over the interstate had gone flat and gray, the kind of sky that presses down on your shoulders and makes everything feel heavier than it already is. Veronica met me at the staff entrance on the south side of the building, a narrow door set back from the alley that most customers never knew existed. She was waiting on the other side when I knocked, and she opened it before my knuckles finished the second rap. Her face was composed the way only someone with 20 years of banking experience can compose a face, calm on the surface, with something urgent moving just underneath. "They're still at the executive counter," she said quietly, falling into step beside me as we moved down a carpeted corridor that smelled of printer ink and recycled air. "The gentleman has been signing documents for the past 40 minutes. Your wife has been doing most of the talking. Has anyone else on staff figured out what's happening?" "No, sir. I told my team it was a routine high-value verification process. They have no reason to question it." She stopped in front of a door and pushed it open without knocking. The room on the other side was small and dim. No windows to the outside world, just a rectangular viewing panel set into the far wall at eye level. A one-way mirror. The kind of glass that lets you see everything on the other side while remaining completely invisible yourself. I stepped up to the glass and looked through. The executive service area on the other side was well lit, cream-colored walls, dark wood furniture, the quiet hum of a professional space, designed to make wealthy clients feel at ease. There were 2 people seated at the primary desk. The first was Evelyn. My wife of 35 years sat with her back perfectly straight, one hand resting on the arm of the leather chair, the other holding a single sheet of paper that she was reviewing with the casual focus of someone checking a restaurant receipt. She was wearing the navy blue blazer she bought last spring, the one she said made her look authoritative. She looked authoritative now. She looked entirely at home. The second person made the air leave my body completely. He was heavier than I remembered. His hair was darker, cut differently, and he wore a beard that Daniel had never had in his life. But the shape of his jaw was the same. The way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right, a habit I used to tease him about when he was 17 years old, that was the same too. He was bent over a stack of documents with a pen in his hand, signing with a slow and deliberate pressure the way someone signs when they want to make sure the signature looks practiced. My right hand found the wall beside the viewing panel and pressed against it hard enough to feel the texture of the paint against my palm. "Mr. Hayes?" Veronica's voice came from just behind my left shoulder. "Are you all right?" I did not answer her right away. I kept my eyes on the man at the desk. I watched him finish signing one page and turn to the next, without looking up, without any hesitation, without any sign that what he was doing was anything other than routine paperwork on an ordinary Monday afternoon. 8 years. The boy I put in the ground 8 years ago was sitting 15 feet away from me signing documents to drain $50 million from accounts I had spent 4 decades building. "Call Marcus Webb," I said. My voice came out quiet and level, and I was grateful for that. "His number is in my phone contacts. Tell him I need him here in the next 20 minutes. Tell him it's not a request." Veronica already had her own phone out. "I'll call him right now." I turned away from the glass long enough to look at her directly. "And Veronica, whatever you do, do not let them leave that counter before I tell you it's time. System delays, verification protocols, anything you need to say. Can you do that?" "Consider it done, Mr. Hayes." She stepped back toward the door phone already at her ear. I turned back to the viewing panel. Marcus Webb had been my personal attorney for 18 years. He was the kind of lawyer who wore the same style of charcoal gray suit every single day and kept his desk so clean it looked like he never worked at it, even though he billed more hours than anyone else in his firm. He had handled every major contract negotiation the Hayes Transportation Group had ever entered into. He had also handled my personal estate documents, including the revised will I had quietly instructed him to prepare 6 weeks ago when I first noticed money moving in ways that Evelyn could not adequately explain. He answered Veronica's call in 2 rings. I heard his voice from across the small room, sharp and immediate, "On my way." I pressed my forehead briefly against the cool surface of the viewing panel, and then straightened up. On the other side of the glass, Daniel finished another page and slid it across the desk toward the bank representative. Evelyn leaned forward and said something that made the representative nod. She patted Daniel once on the forearm, a small confident gesture, the gesture of a woman who believed everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. I watched that small gesture and felt something shift inside my chest. Not grief this time. Not shock. Something colder and much more deliberate. Marcus walked through the staff entrance door 19 minutes later, calmly set his leather briefcase on the table beside me, looked through the viewing panel for exactly 10 seconds, and then turned to face me with an expression I had seen only twice before in 18 years. The expression he wore when he had already identified every exit from a situation and was choosing the best one. "Tell me everything," he said. I told Marcus everything in 11 minutes. I kept my voice low and my back to the viewing panel because I did not want to look at the two of them while I was talking. I told him about the phone call from Veronica. I told him about the drive down from Dallas. I told him what I saw through the glass. Marcus stood with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my left shoulder, the way he always stood when he was building a structure in his mind, organizing information into load-bearing walls and support beams. When I finished, he did not say anything for a moment. Then he uncrossed his arms, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a legal pad and a pen. "How much are they attempting to withdraw?" he asked. Veronica said they presented transfer authorization forms for the primary trust account. The full balance. I paused. $50 million. Marcus wrote something on the pad. His handwriting was small and vertical, the kind of handwriting that takes up as little space as possible. And the man at the counter. You are certain it is Daniel? It was not a question, but I answered it anyway. I am certain, he nodded once. Then here is what we are going to do. He turned toward Veronica, who had been standing near the door, with her hands folded in front of her patient, and absolutely still. Mrs. Shaw. Are you familiar with the deferred confirmation protocol? Veronica straightened slightly. We call it a shadow transaction internally. It is used when our fraud detection unit needs to create the appearance of a completed transfer while the actual funds remain frozen in a restricted internal ledger. The customer sees a confirmation screen showing the transfer went through. In reality, not a single dollar has moved. Is it legal? I asked. Marcus answered before Veronica could. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, a financial institution has full authority to freeze accounts and withhold funds when there is reasonable suspicion of fraud, without notifying the account holder or the party requesting the transfer. The bank is not deceiving the customer in any legally actionable sense. It is executing a fraud prevention measure. He looked at Veronica. Can you initiate it from here? I can initiate it from my tablet right now, she said. Our internal fraud team will isolate the primary trust account from the public ledger within 90 seconds. The terminal at the executive desk will display a green confirmation notice. From where they are sitting, the transfer will appear completely successful. Do it, Marcus said. Veronica typed rapidly on her secured tablet, her fingers moving with the efficiency of someone who had run this sequence before. I turned back to the viewing panel. On the other side of the glass, the bank representative at the executive desk glanced at her monitor. A moment passed. Then the screen shifted to a bright confirmation display, green text against a white background. The representative nodded toward Evelyn and said something I could not hear through the glass. Evelyn reached across and placed her hand briefly over Daniel's. The gesture lasted less than 2 seconds, but it told me everything about the relationship between those two people. It was not the gesture of a grieving mother reunited with a lost son. It was the gesture of a business partner confirming a transaction. Daniel exhaled. His shoulders dropped about half an inch, the physical release of someone who has been holding tension for a long time and finally believes the hard part is over. He gathered the signed documents into a neat stack and tapped the edges against the desk to align them. Camera footage, Marcus said without turning away from his legal pad. I want every angle that covers that desk from the moment they walked in. Already flagged and time-stamped, Veronica said. High definition, full facial coverage. Fingerprints. The documents Daniel signed were printed on treated paper. Our fraud team applies it to high-value authorization forms as a standard precaution. Every surface he touched has recoverable prints. Marcus wrote 2 more lines on the pad. Good. That gives us visual identification, a biometric record, and a signed paper trail connecting him directly to an attempted fraudulent withdrawal. That is enough for a criminal referral tonight, if we need it. He finally looked up from the pad and turned to me. Richard, I need you to understand something. If you walk through that door right now and confront them, they walk. Their attorney will argue emotional distress, mistaken identity, 100 different angles. We will spend 2 years in civil court, and they will spend that time moving whatever assets they can reach. I looked through the glass. Evelyn was standing now, smoothing the front of her blazer with both hands. Daniel was putting on his jacket. They were preparing to leave. Two people who believed they had just collected $50 million and had the rest of their lives ahead of them. So we let them go, I said. We let them go, Marcus confirmed. We let them walk out of this building believing they have already won, and then we build a case around them that has no exits. Veronica stepped up beside me as Evelyn and Daniel moved toward the lobby. Through the glass, I watched my wife push open the door to the main banking floor. Watched her tuck her handbag under her arm. Watched her say something to Daniel that made the corner of his mouth lift. They did not look back. There was no reason for them to look back. The lobby door closed behind them. Let them celebrate, Marcus said quietly, capping his pen. The clock is already ticking. I kept my eyes on the empty chairs at the executive desk. The neat stack of worthless documents, the green confirmation still glowing on the terminal screen. $50 million that had not moved an inch. What do we need next? I asked. Marcus picked up his briefcase. We need them to talk. And for that, Richard, you are going to have to go home. I did not go straight home. I drove for 40 minutes through streets I had known for 30 years without seeing any of them, past the old warehouse district, where I started Hayes Transportation Group with 2 trucks and a credit line I had no business qualifying for. Past the church on Shepherd Drive where Daniel was baptized at 6 weeks old. Past the intersection on Westheimer where he rear-ended a pickup truck at 17 and called me instead of his mother because he said I would be calmer about it. I was not calm about it. But I came. I pulled into the parking lot of a closed hardware store on the edge of our neighborhood and sat with the engine running and both hands still on the wheel. The insurance policy had been Evelyn's idea. I remembered the evening she brought it up. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, the dishes still stacked beside the sink, and she slid a manila folder across the table toward me with the calm efficiency of someone presenting a business proposal. A whole life policy on Daniel. $8 million in coverage. She explained it as asset protection, a way to ensure that if anything happened to our son, the family's financial foundation would remain intact. I remembered thinking it was unusually practical for Evelyn. She had never shown much interest in the financial architecture of the family before. But I signed the paperwork without asking enough questions, because that was the kind of husband I was. I trusted her the way you trust the ground under your feet. You do not examine it. You simply walk on it and assume it will hold. Daniel was 22 at the time. Young, healthy, working his first real job in the logistics division of our company. There was no particular reason to insure his life for $8 million, but Evelyn said it was responsible planning. And I believed her because responsible planning was something I understood and respected, and because the alternative questioning my wife's motives for wanting to protect our son was not something that occurred to me as necessary. 3 years later, Daniel started losing money. It began with outside investments, the kind of deals that sound credible when someone with a good education and a confident manner describes them over lunch. Private equity in a tech startup, a real estate partnership in Austin. Each one returned nothing. Each one cost more than the last. And because Daniel was drawing from the company's operational accounts to cover his personal losses by the time I discovered what was happening, the shortage had reached $400,000. I sat across from him in my office and listened to him explain himself for 20 minutes. He did not cry. He did not ask for forgiveness. He laid out the situation with a kind of flat detachment that troubled me more than tears would have. When he finished, I told him I needed a week to decide what to do. What I meant was that I needed a week before I called Marcus and began the process of removing Daniel from the company's ownership structure and revising the terms of my estate documents. I never got that week. 11 days after that conversation, Daniel's car went off a rain-slicked overpass on the outskirts of Katy, Texas. The vehicle crashed into a deep drainage channel during a severe storm. The impact and flooding made recovery extremely difficult. Investigators identified the vehicle through its registration, personal belongings recovered from the scene, and records found inside the car. Because of the circumstances surrounding the crash, Victor Collins, the Harris County medical examiner, certified the death after reviewing the available evidence. Dr. Victor Collins signed the death certificate. He was the Harris County forensic medical examiner at the time, a man Evelyn had introduced to me years earlier as an old college acquaintance. I shook his hand at 2 company events. He had a firm handshake and a quiet manner, and I had no reason to think of him as anything other than what he appeared to be. The funeral was on a Thursday in November. I stood at the graveside in a black overcoat, while a cold wind came in off the Gulf and stripped the last leaves from the oak trees along the cemetery fence line. Pastor Glenn Howard, who had known our family for 15 years and baptized Daniel in that same church on Shepherd Drive, stood to my left and read from the book of John in a voice that did not waver once. I held a white rose over the open grave for 11 minutes before I could make myself let it go. Evelyn stood 3 feet to my right. She did not cry. I told myself it was because she grieved differently than I did, that some people go inward when loss hits them, that silence was its own form of devastation. I reached for her hand once during the service. She let me hold it for about 30 seconds, and then gently withdrew it to adjust her coat collar. I thought about that moment now, sitting in a dark parking lot 8 years later, engine idling the dashboard clock, reading 7:42 in the evening. She had not been grieving. She had been waiting. I turned the engine off and sat in the sudden silence with the understanding settling through me the way cold water settles slowly into every available space. $8 million in insurance money. A forensic examiner she already knew. A son who had just become a liability to the estate. All of it planned. Every piece of it. I got out of the car, buttoned my jacket against the October air, and started walking toward home. I needed to be inside that house before Evelyn got back. I needed to look at it with the eyes I should have been using for the past 8 years. The front door of our house opened with the same sound it had made for 22 years, a soft resistance followed by a click that I had stopped hearing sometime around the turn of the century. Tonight I heard it. I heard every small thing about that house as I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me. The way the entryway tiles held the cold from outside. The faint smell of the candle Evelyn burned in the kitchen on weekend mornings. The particular silence of a house that has been empty for several hours and has settled back into itself. I did not turn on the overhead light. I reached for the lamp on the hall table instead, the one with the amber shade that threw a warm circle across the entryway floor, and I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The living room was to my left. I had not meant to go in there first. My intention was to go to the kitchen, pour myself a glass of water, sit at the table, and think through what Marcus and I had discussed before Evelyn came home. But my feet carried me left instead of straight, the way feet sometimes do when the body knows something. The mind is still working up the courage to acknowledge. The small table was in the corner of the living room, beside the bookcase. I had built it myself 12 years ago from a piece of walnut I found at an estate sale in Beaumont. Sanded it smooth, stained it dark, put a single shelf across the middle. It was supposed to hold books. Instead, 2 weeks after Daniel's funeral, I had cleared the shelf and set his photograph on top of it. A white candle on either side. A small ceramic cross that had sat on his bedroom windowsill when he was a boy. I crossed the living room and stood in front of the table. The photograph was gone. In its place sat a small framed print of a coastal landscape, pale sand and gray water, the kind of generic image that hotels put in guest rooms to fill wall space without saying anything at all. It was positioned precisely where Daniel's photograph had stood for 8 years, centered between the two candle holders, which were still there, but held new candles that had never been lit. I picked up the framed print and turned it over. A price sticker on the back. $12 from a home goods store on Westheimer. I set it back down carefully, the way you set something down when the act of handling it any further feels like a contamination. I thought about every Tuesday morning for 8 years. I set them in a small vase beside his photograph every week and removed the old ones when they faded. Evelyn had never once joined me at this table. I had told myself it was because grief takes different shapes in different people. Some people need ritual. Some people need distance. I had respected what I believed was her distance. She had not been keeping her distance. She had known there was nothing to grieve. I turned away from the table and walked to the armchair near the window, the one I sat in on Sunday evenings to read. I lowered myself into it slowly, the way my body had started insisting on in the past few years, and I sat with my hands resting on my knees and looked at that coastal landscape print sitting between two unlit candles where my son's face used to be. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I did not intend to look at it. But the screen lit up on its own as a notification came through, and the glow caught my eye through the fabric, and I pulled it out without thinking. It was Evelyn's phone that had lit up. She had left it on the side table when she went out this morning. I had not noticed it there until now. The screen had gone dark again, but I had seen the notification in the half-second it was visible. A text message. The preview showed only a name and the first 4 words of the message. The name was Victor. The 4 words were, "Everything went fine today." I set my phone back in my pocket and looked at the lamp on the hall table at the amber circle it threw across the entryway tiles. I listened to the house settle around me. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then went quiet. Victor Collins had retired from the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office in early 2018, roughly 3 months after he signed Daniel's death certificate. He moved out of state shortly after that. I knew this because I had looked him up once about 4 years after Daniel's funeral, in a moment of wanting to thank the man who had handled the worst paperwork of my life with professionalism and discretion. I had found a forwarding address in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I had written the address down in my personal notebook and then never sent anything, because I could not figure out what a man writes to the person who certified his son's death. I understood now why Victor Collins had left Houston 3 months after that funeral. I understood quite a lot of things now that I had not understood this morning. I heard Evelyn's car in the driveway. The familiar sound of her engine, the specific crunch of her tires on the concrete apron at the edge of the garage. I had 30 seconds, maybe 40, before the back door opened. I put her phone back exactly where she had left it. I straightened the lampshade. I moved to the sofa and sat down and picked up the book from the side table and opened it to a random page and held it in front of my face with both hands. By the time Evelyn's key turned in the back door lock, I was just a tired old man sitting in his living room reading after a long day. Evelyn set her handbag on the kitchen counter with the particular thud it always made when she was tired. A sound I had heard 10,000 times over 35 years of marriage. She moved to the refrigerator without looking into the living room first, which told me she had not noticed the lamp I left on. Or if she had, she did not find it unusual enough to mention. "You're home early," she said, pulling out a pitcher of iced tea and setting it on the counter. I lowered the book to my lap and turned my head toward the kitchen doorway. Dallas wrapped up faster than I expected. Decided to drive back tonight. She poured herself a glass without offering me one. "You should have called. I would have made dinner." "I ate on the road," I said. "Don't worry about it." She carried her glass into the living room and sat in the chair across from mine, the one near the fireplace that she had always preferred, because it caught the warmth better in winter. She looked tired. not the tired of a woman who had spent the afternoon managing a complicated financial crime. Just ordinary tired, the surface kind, the kind you wear like a mask when the real work of the day is something you cannot discuss. We sat there for about 10 minutes. She talked about a neighbor's landscaping renovation. I made the appropriate sounds. My eyes drifted once to the corner of the room where the coastal landscape print sat between the two unlit candles, and I pulled them back before she could notice. When she went upstairs to change, I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I took my phone from my jacket pocket and called Tommy Briggs. Tommy had been driving for me since 2005. He was 58 years old, built like a man who had spent his 20s doing physical work, and his 50s doing careful work, broad through the shoulders, with hands that were always steady and eyes that noticed things without making a production of noticing them. He had driven Daniel to school twice a week during Daniel's senior year of high school, when our second car was in the shop for a month and Evelyn was traveling. Tommy never talked much. That was one of the things I valued most about him. He picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Hayes, everything all right?" "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice low. "And I need you to tell me exactly what you remember without editing anything out, because you think it might upset me." A pause. "All right." "You told me once, maybe 2 years ago, that you saw Evelyn somewhere unexpected. I remember you started to say something about it and then stopped. I think I changed the subject." I had changed the subject because at the time I was late for a meeting and the comment had not seemed important. "I need you to tell me what you saw." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to lie, but the quiet of someone pulling up an exact memory and making sure they had it right before speaking. "It was a Tuesday," he said. "Late afternoon, around 4:30. I was coming back from dropping the Hendricks contracts at the courier office on Milam Street. I took Elgin across to get back to the garage, and I stopped at the light at the corner of Elgin and Midtown Boulevard." He paused. "Mrs. Hayes was coming out of the Caldwell Tower. That building on the east side of Midtown, the one with the blue glass on the lower floors. I knew the building. 15 stories residential on the upper floors, a dry cleaner, and a dental office at street level. 12 miles from our house." "Was she alone?" I asked. "Yes, sir. She had a bag with her, one of those insulated grocery bags, the kind you use to keep things cold. She got into her car. I almost pulled over to say hello, but the light changed and the car behind me honked, so I kept going." Another pause. "I should have told you at the time." "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. You have nothing to be sorry for," I said. "Tommy, I need you to go to that building tomorrow morning, early, before 7. I need you to watch the entrance and tell me if you see anyone coming or going from the upper residential floors who looks familiar to you." The line was quiet for a moment. When Tommy spoke again, his voice had shifted into the careful register he used when he understood that something serious was happening and did not need it explained to him. "I'll be there at 6, he said. "One more thing." I stood up from the armchair and moved to the window looking out at the dark street. The insurance money, after Daniel died. Evelyn said she was setting up a memorial fund with the payout, $8 million. Did you ever hear anything about that fund, a scholarship, a donation, anything? Tommy took his time answering. "No, sir," he said finally. "I never heard anything about a memorial fund, and I would have heard. I drove Mrs. Hayes to most of her appointments in that first year." I thanked him and ended the call. $8 million. No memorial fund, no scholarship, no donation. The money had gone somewhere, and the only place it could have gone, the only place that made sense when I lined up everything I had learned in the past 6 hours, was to a man living under a false name in a building 12 miles from our house. A man who was supposed to be buried in Glenwood Cemetery in a grave I visited every year on the same Thursday in November. I heard Evelyn's footsteps on the stairs. I put my phone away, moved back to the armchair, and picked up the book again. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. 30 years of negotiating freight contracts across 4 states had given me a face I could arrange on short notice. She appeared in the doorway in her robe, holding her empty glass. "Coming to bed soon." "Another hour," I said. "I want to finish this chapter." She nodded and went back upstairs. I set the book face down on my knee and stared at the unlit candles across the room. Tommy's text came through 20 minutes later. 6 words. "Light on in Unit 414. I sat with Tommy's text on my screen for a long time without responding to it. Unit 414. A light burning in a window 12 miles from the house where I had spent 35 years, building a life with a woman who apparently used that life the way a contractor uses scaffolding. Something to stand on while the real structure goes up somewhere else. Something to dismantle quietly once it has served its purpose. I typed back 2 words. "Thank you, Tommy." Then I set the phone face down on the side table and looked at the ceiling. The house made its small sounds around me. The refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen. A car passing slowly on the street outside. The particular groan of the 3rd stair from the top that had needed fixing for 4 years, and that I had never gotten around to, because there was always something more pressing, always another contract, another route to negotiate, another quarter to close. I heard that stair groan now. Evelyn was coming back down. I picked up the book, found a page, fixed my eyes on it. She appeared in the living room doorway wearing her robe and slippers, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, the way she wore them when she was not actually planning to read anything. She was carrying a small plate with 2 shortbread cookies on it, the kind she bought from the Scottish bakery on Kirby Drive that I had always liked. She set the plate on the side table next to my chair without being asked. It was such a precise gesture, so calibrated. The right amount of consideration to register as affection without requiring any real emotional output. I had received that gesture 10,000 times and never once questioned what was behind it. "You seem tense," she said, settling back into her chair. "Dallas give you trouble?" "Contract dispute with a shipper out of Beaumont," I said. "Nothing that won't sort itself out by end of week." She made a sympathetic sound and tucked her feet up under her the way she did when she was settling in for a conversation. "You work too hard, Richard. You have people who can handle those calls." "I know. You should think about stepping back more. Let the younger managers carry some of the load." She tilted her head slightly. "We've talked about this." We had talked about it. Or rather, she had raised it with increasing frequency over the past 18 months, the suggestion that I reduce my involvement in the company's day-to-day operations. I had taken it as concern for my health. My cardiologist had said the same thing at my last checkup, that stress was a contributing factor I needed to manage more carefully. It had seemed like the kind of thing a caring wife says to a husband in his late 60s. I understood now what stepping back would have meant. A man with less visibility into his own accounts, less awareness of what was moving and where. A man who signed documents that were placed in front of him because he trusted the people placing them there. "You're probably right," I said. Evelyn smiled. It reached her eyes in the way that smiles reach eyes when the person behind them has had a very good day and is working to keep that satisfaction appropriately contained. I thought we might have dinner together tomorrow evening," I said. "Somewhere nice. We haven't done that in a while." She looked at me for just a fraction of a second longer than the question required. "That sounds lovely," she said. The words came out smooth and immediate, but her left hand, which had been resting open on the arm of the chair, closed slowly into a loose fist and then relaxed again. A small movement, the kind you only catch if you are watching for it. Brennan's, I agreed. I'll make a reservation in the morning. She uncurled from the chair and stood collecting her empty glass from the end table. Don't stay up too late. You look exhausted. I won't, I said. Go on up. I'll be an hour at most. She crossed the living room toward the staircase. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at me, and for a moment I had the strange and uncomfortable experience of looking at a face I had memorized over 3.5 decades and finding it entirely unfamiliar. The arrangement of her features was exactly as it had always been. The woman behind them was someone I did not know at all. It's good to have you home, she said. It's good to be home, I said. She went upstairs. I listened to her footsteps cross the hallway overhead, heard the bedroom door open and close, heard the muffled sound of the television coming on at low volume the way it always did when she could not sleep immediately. I set the book on the side table and pressed both palms against my knees and breathed. 30 years of sitting across negotiating tables from men who wanted something I had and were willing to misrepresent themselves to get it had taught me one thing above every other. The most dangerous person in any room is not the one who is openly aggressive. It is the one who has already decided the outcome and is simply managing your perception of events until the moment arrives when your cooperation is no longer required. I picked up my phone and texted Marcus. 3 sentences. She doesn't know I was at the bank today. Dinner tomorrow at Brennan's. I need the device before noon. His reply came back in under a minute. Understood. I will be at your office at 10. I turned the lamp off and sat in the dark for a while listening to the house. Then I got up, ate one of the shortbread cookies, because my body required something, and my mind was in no condition to make decisions about food, and went upstairs to lie beside a woman I had loved for 35 years and spend the night not sleeping. I was already awake when the alarm on my phone went off at 5:30. I had been awake since 3, lying on my back in the dark, with my eyes open, listening to Evelyn breathe beside me with the slow regularity of someone who had no difficulty sleeping at all. I got up without making noise, dressed in the bathroom, with the door closed, and went downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen was gray and quiet in the early morning light. I stood at the counter while the coffee brewed and looked out the window at the backyard at the oak tree Daniel had climbed every summer until he was 12 years old and too old to admit he still wanted to. My phone buzzed at 6:14. Tommy, I'm here. Parking lot across from the Caldwell Tower. East entrance has a clear sightline to the lobby and the side stairwell door. I typed back, anything moving, not yet. Give it time. I carried my coffee to the kitchen table and sat down. I opened the folder Marcus had sent to my email late the previous night, a preliminary document outlining the legal framework we were building. Identity fraud under Texas Penal Code, Section 32.51 carried a sentence range depending on the value of the assets involved. At $50 million, we were looking at a first-degree felony. Insurance fraud under both Texas state law and federal statute, 18 United States Code, Section 1347, added additional counts. Marcus had written a single line at the bottom of the document in his characteristically compressed style. This is sufficient for a warrant. We need the audio to make it airtight. I was on my second cup of coffee when Tommy called, instead of texting. I picked up immediately. What do you have? He just came out the side door. Tommy's voice was low and controlled the voice of a man who had spent 20 years navigating situations that required him to be unobtrusive. Jean's gray jacket cap pulled low. He walked to the end of the block and picked up a newspaper from the machine on the corner. He's heading back inside now. My hand tightened around the phone. Did you get a clear look at his face? Yes, sir. Beard longer than I remember. Hair darker. But Mr. Hayes. A pause. It's him. I drove that boy twice a week for a year. I know the way he walks, the left shoulder, the way he tips his head when he's reading something, the left shoulder. Daniel had carried his backpack on his left side all through high school because he said the right strap chafed. I had teased him about it more times than I could count. He had never changed the habit. Take a photograph if you can do it without being seen, I said. Already did, Tommy said. Sending it now. The image came through 30 seconds later. A man in a gray jacket and dark cap caught in three-quarter profile as he turned back toward the building entrance. The beard was fuller than anything Daniel had worn in his 20s. The hair was a shade of brown that did not match his natural color. But the jaw was the same. The particular angle of the nose was the same. And the left shoulder was pulled up just slightly higher than the right, exactly as it had always been. I set the phone on the table and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and held them there. 8 years. Daniel had been 10 miles from our house, 12 at the most, for 8 years. Every November when I drove to Glenwood Cemetery and stood at his grave and said whatever it is a man says when he is talking to a headstone that marks nothing, Daniel had been 12 miles away in a building with blue glass on the lower floors, reading a newspaper he picked up from a machine on the corner. I picked the phone back up. The mailbox, I said. Did you see a name on it? Hal D. Warren, Tommy said. Unit 414, D. Warren. Daniel had used the first initial of his real name and taken his middle name Warren as his surname. It was the kind of alias that required almost no imagination, which told me either that Daniel did not think he needed to be particularly clever about it, or that Evelyn had arranged the paperwork in a hurry, and he had gone along with whatever she set up. Either possibility said something about the dynamic between them that I did not want to examine too closely right now. Tommy. I stood up from the kitchen table and carried my cup to the sink. I need you to stay there until 9 o'clock. Note anyone who comes or goes from that unit. Do not approach the building. Do not let him see you. Understood. And Tommy. I turned the tap on and rinsed the cup slowly. Thank you. I mean that. He was quiet for a moment. Mr. Hayes, I've been driving for you for 20 years. You have always been straight with me. Whatever you need to get through this, I'm here. He paused. That boy was never good enough for what you gave him. I thought so at the time, and I think so now. I turned the tap off and stood at the sink with the empty cup in my hand. My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the specific exhaustion of a man who has just been told something he already knew but had not yet allowed himself to feel. I'll call you at 9, I said. I set the cup in the drying rack, picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, and checked the time. 8:40. Marcus would be at my office in an hour and 20 minutes. I took one more look around the kitchen, at the coffee maker Evelyn had chosen, at the curtains she had hung, at the calendar on the wall with her handwriting filling in the dates, appointments, and reminders and small domestic notations that made a life look organized and intentional from the outside. I buttoned my jacket and walked out the front door into the October morning. The air was cool and carried the particular smell of Houston in autumn exhaust and cut grass and something faintly mineral from the bayou 2 streets over. I stood on the front step for a moment and looked at the oak tree in the yard. Then I got in my car and drove to the office to meet Marcus. Marcus was already in my office when I arrived. He had his briefcase open on the conference table and 3 separate folders arranged in a precise row in front of him, the way he always organized a working session left to right in the order he intended to address things. A cup of coffee sat at his right elbow untouched, and probably cold. Marcus rarely remembered to drink anything when he was focused. He looked up when I came through the door. "Close it behind you," he said. I closed the door, hung my jacket on the hook beside the bookcase, and sat down across from him. Through the window behind his head, the Houston skyline was sharp and clean against a pale blue October sky. The kind of morning that looked better than it felt. "Tommy's photographs came through to my secure server last night," Marcus said, opening the first folder. "I had them enhanced and printed. The facial geometry is consistent across 11 reference points when compared against Daniel's driver's license photograph from 2014. He slid a sheet across the table toward me. 2 images side by side. Daniel at 23 from his license. The man in the gray jacket outside the Caldwell Tower. For the purposes of a criminal proceeding, this is identification." I looked at both photographs for a moment, and then pushed the sheet back. "What else?" "The financial trail." He opened the second folder. Between January 2018 and March 2023, 41 wire transfers were made from a personal account held jointly by you and Evelyn to a series of intermediary accounts. The transfers ranged from $12,000 to $85,000 each. Total outflow across that period was approximately $2.3 million. He paused. The destination accounts all trace back to a property management company registered in Delaware. That company holds the lease on Unit 414 of the Caldwell Tower. I sat back in my chair. $2.3 million moved in increments, small enough not to trigger automatic reporting thresholds, spread across 7 years, disguised as ordinary outgoing transfers from a joint account I had never monitored closely, because Evelyn managed the household finances, and I had never thought to question that arrangement. "She was careful," I said. "She was very careful." Marcus agreed. "But not careful enough because the transfers stopped in March of 2023, which corresponds with the point at which the insurance payout would have been substantially depleted. After that date, the financial pressure on Daniel's situation would have become acute." He closed the second folder, which is why they went to the bank on Monday. He reached into his briefcase and set a small object on the table between us. It was roughly the size and shape of a thick thumb drive, matte black, with no markings of any kind on its surface. If you found it in a drawer, you would assume it was a piece of outdated electronics waiting to be thrown away. Texas Penal Code, Section 16.02. Marcus said in the tone he used when he wanted to make sure something was on the record, even in a private conversation. Texas is a one-party consent state. Any participant in a conversation may legally record that conversation without the knowledge or consent of other parties. As the owner of the property in which the recording will take place, and as a participant in any conversation that occurs within that property, you are fully within your legal rights to deploy this device. "How does it work?" I asked. "It transmits continuously to an encrypted server the moment it detects ambient sound above a threshold level. It has a battery life of 96 hours. The audio is time-stamped and stored in a format that is admissible in Texas state court and federal court." He picked it up and held it toward me. "Place it somewhere with a clear line to the center of whatever room Evelyn uses most frequently when she is on the phone. The kitchen, the living room, not the bedroom." I took the device from him. It weighed almost nothing. "Marcus." I turned it over in my palm. "The Collins connection. Where are we on that?" He opened the third folder. Victor Collins retired from the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office in February of 2018, 3 months after signing Daniel's death certificate. He relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he has maintained a low profile for the past 7 years. Marcus set a printed page in front of me, a column of dates and dollar amounts. However, between 2017 and 2021, 11 payments were made. From a personal account registered to Evelyn to a consulting firm called VPC Medical Advisory Services. The registered agent of that firm is Victor Paul Collins, $340,000 total, paid in installments across 4 years. To a company with Victor Collins's initials in the name. The kind of arrangement that looked like professional consulting fees from a distance and looked like payment for falsified death records from anywhere closer. "Can we move on, Collins?" I asked. "I have already been in contact with a colleague at the federal level," Marcus said. Given the interstate nature of the payments and Collins's current residence in New Mexico, this falls under federal jurisdiction. A request for a search warrant on his Albuquerque residence is being prepared. We are looking at 48 hours. I set the recording device on the table and pressed one finger lightly against its surface. 96 hours of battery. $2.3 million in hidden transfers. 48 hours until Collins. Everything was moving. All of it at once in different directions, converging on the same point. "Tonight," Marcus said, standing and beginning to reassemble his folders. "You need to place that device before Evelyn gets home. And then you need to behave exactly as you have been behaving. Tired, distracted. A man carrying ordinary burdens." I picked up the device and closed my hand around it. "That part I can manage," I said. Marcus almost smiled. For Marcus, almost was considerable. I had placed the recording device behind the base of the lamp on the side table in the living room at 4:30 that afternoon, while Evelyn was at her Tuesday yoga class. The lamp was a heavy brass piece she had bought at an antique market in Galveston 8 years ago, and had never once moved since the day she set it down. I pressed the device against the back of the base where the brass met the wall, checked the angle twice to confirm it had a clear line to the center of the room, and then went upstairs to change into a suit jacket before she got home. Brennan's of Houston occupied a 19th-century Creole cottage on Dunleavy Street, in the Upper Kirby neighborhood, a restaurant that had been serving the same city for decades, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what it is and having no interest in being anything else. Evelyn had always liked it, for the same reason she liked most things. It projected a certain quality of life that she found reassuring to be associated with. We were seated at a corner table near the window. The room was warm and amber-lit, filled with the low sound of other people's conversations and the occasional clink of glassware. A small candle burned between us. Evelyn wore a deep burgundy dress I had not seen before, and had done something different with her hair. She looked, as she always did in public, entirely composed. The waiter brought bread and took our drink orders. Evelyn asked for a glass of the Sancerre she always ordered here, and I ordered bourbon neat, which was not something I usually did at dinner. She noticed but did not comment on it. We talked about nothing for the first 20 minutes. The food, the neighborhood, a mutual acquaintance who had recently retired. Evelyn was good at this. The management of surface conversation, the maintenance of an atmosphere that felt warm without requiring anything real from either participant. I had always taken this skill for granted as a social grace. Sitting across from her now, I recognized it as something she had been practicing for a very long time. The entrees arrived. Evelyn cut into her fish with the precise, unhurried movements of a woman who was comfortable everywhere she went. She looked up from her plate with an expression of mild concern that she had clearly prepared before leaving the house. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the Galveston property. We owned a beach house in Galveston that I had bought 20 years ago as a place to take Daniel during summers. After Daniel died, I had kept it because I could not bring myself to sell it. Evelyn had suggested selling it 3 times in the past 4 years. Each time I had declined. Each time she had accepted my answer without visible frustration, which I now understood meant she had simply been waiting for a better angle. "What about it?" I said. "It needs significant work. The foundation inspection last spring flagged several issues. And honestly, Richard, neither of us uses it anymore." She set her fork down and looked at me with the particular expression she used when she wanted to appear reluctant to say something she had actually been planning to say for weeks. "I spoke with a realtor last month, informally, just to get a sense of the market. She thinks we could get close to $4 million for it in the current climate." I cut a piece of my steak and chewed it slowly. "You spoke to a realtor about our property without mentioning it to me." "Informally?" she repeated. "I didn't want to bring it up until I had something concrete to tell you." She picked up her wine glass. "I just think it might be time to simplify. We're not getting younger, and maintaining properties we don't use is a drain on energy and resources that could be better directed elsewhere." Elsewhere. I wondered what elsewhere meant in the financial architecture she and Daniel had been constructing. Whether the Galveston sale was intended as a supplementary stream, or whether it was the backup plan in case the trust account move drew scrutiny. "I'll think about it," I said. She smiled and returned to her fish. "That's all I ask." I lifted my bourbon glass and looked at her over the rim. The candlelight caught the angle of her face in a way that was genuinely beautiful, which was the most complicated thing about all of this, that none of what I knew about her had retroactively made her less than what she appeared to be on the surface. It had simply added a layer underneath that changed the meaning of every surface above it. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She looked up. "Of course." "Are you happy?" I set the glass down. "I mean in general, with the life we have, with how things are." The question caught her slightly off balance. I saw it in the way her eyes moved a quick recalibration behind the composure. "That's an unusual question for a Tuesday dinner," she said. "I've been thinking about things lately," I said. "Getting older. What matters? Whether I've paid attention to the right things." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm from the wine glass. "You have built something remarkable, Richard. We both have. There's nothing to regret. We both have." As though the $50 million in those accounts was the product of a shared enterprise. As though she had been a partner in its construction, rather than someone who had spent the past decade preparing to dismantle it. I turned my hand over and held hers briefly, and then let go to pick up my fork. The check came 9:15. Evelyn excused herself to the restroom while I signed for it. I sat alone at the table for 3 minutes watching the candle burn, listening to the restaurant hum around me. Her phone was on the table beside her wine glass where she had left it. The screen lit up with an incoming message. I looked at it without touching it. The sender was listed only as a number I did not recognize. The preview text read 4 words. "Tomorrow is still on." She came back from the restroom, picked up her phone without glancing at the screen, and dropped it into her handbag. "Ready?" she said. "Ready?" I said. I stood, helped her with her coat, and followed her out into the October night. Before I reveal the shocking audio recording that exposed their darkest secrets, I'd love to know you're still with me. Drop a 1 or comment "I'm here" in the section below, so I can see who's following this story to the end. And just a quick reminder, the following chapter contains fictional elements crafted for dramatic storytelling and reflection. If this isn't your kind of content, feel free to turn off the video right here. Marcus called at 7:45 Wednesday morning, while I was still in the kitchen with my first cup of coffee. The device recorded 11 hours and 23 minutes of audio, he said without preamble. Most of it is ambient. Television's household sounds nothing of evidentiary value. However, there is a segment beginning at 11:17 last night that you need to hear. A pause. I am sending a car for you. Be outside in 15 minutes. I was outside in 12. His office was on the 14th floor of a building on Louisiana Street, 10 minutes from our house in light morning traffic. The receptionist waved me through without asking me to sign in, which told me Marcus had instructed her to expect me. He was standing at his desk when I came through the door, laptop open, a set of small external speakers connected by a cable to the side port. He did not offer me coffee. He did not ask how I had slept. He simply pulled out the chair across from his and said, "Sit down." I sat. He pressed the space bar. The first sound was the creak of the living room floorboards, the specific groan of the third board from the left that I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. Then the soft sound of Evelyn settling into her chair, the rustle of fabric, the small click of a phone screen being unlocked, then her voice low and unhurried, as though she were placing a grocery order. "It went well tonight," she said. "He seems tired, distracted. He asked me if I was happy, which means he is feeling sentimental, not suspicious. Sentimental men are easy." A pause. Daniel's voice came through the speaker, slightly compressed by the phone connection, but unmistakably his. The particular rhythm of the way he constructed sentences was something I had heard every day for 23 years. "Did he say anything about the bank?" Daniel asked. "Nothing. Not one word. He has no idea." Evelyn's voice carried a lightness that I recognized from 35 years of marriage as the sound she made when something had gone exactly as she planned. "He actually cried a little at dinner. Asked me if I thought we had built something good together. You can imagine." Daniel made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "What did you tell him?" "I told him what he needed to hear. What I have always told him what he needed to hear." A brief, and then her voice dropped half a register, not into seriousness, but into something closer to contempt. "He built $50 million and never once thought to ask who was sitting across the table from him while he did it. That kind of man does not need to be outmaneuvered. He just needs to be managed." The room in Marcus's office was very quiet. Outside the window, 14 floors below Louisiana Street carried its ordinary Wednesday morning traffic, delivery trucks and commuters, and the distant sound of a construction crew starting their day. None of it reached us clearly enough to matter. Daniel said, "The account. After Thursday. What is the sequence?" "The trust releases to the holding account first," Evelyn said. "From there it moves in 3 tranches over 72 hours to the 2 offshore accounts and the domestic LLC. By the time anyone looks closely, the domestic trail ends at the LLC, and the offshore portion is outside the reach of standard discovery." Another pause. "We have been planning this for 8 years, Daniel. It will take 3 days to complete, and then it is finished." "And him," Daniel said. Evelyn took a moment before answering. "Once everything is settled, we retain the conservatorship attorney to file the capacity petition. With the medical documentation in place, the court appoints a guardian. At that point, his access to any remaining accounts is suspended pending the evaluation." Her voice was entirely level, the way a voice is level when the person speaking has rehearsed the words often enough that they no longer carry any weight. "There is a facility in Pearland that Marcus recommended before we parted ways with him. Private rooms, good staff. He will be comfortable." Marcus's hand moved to the space bar and stopped the playback. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. I know because I counted them the same way I had counted the seconds in the Dallas hotel room 2 days ago, when Veronica Shaw first said Daniel's name. 4 seconds was apparently the amount of time my body required to absorb something it had no framework for processing. A facility in Pearland. A conservatorship petition. Medical documentation already prepared by a physician they had retained before they parted ways with Marcus, which meant they had approached my own attorney, first been refused, and gone elsewhere without my knowledge. They had planned to take the money, declare me incompetent, and put me in a care facility 20 minutes from my own house. I pressed both palms flat against the surface of Marcus's desk and looked at the laptop screen. The audio timeline showed 40 more minutes of recorded conversation that we had not yet reached. "Is that enough?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Marcus looked at me steadily. "For the criminal referral, yes. For the conservatorship petition to be dismissed, yes. For the warrant, yes." He closed the laptop gently. "But I want to give you a moment before we continue." "I do not need a moment," I said. He studied my face for 2 seconds. Then he opened the laptop again. "There is one more segment," he said. "Recorded at 12:44 this morning. You need to hear it before we proceed." His finger moved to the spacebar. I straightened in the chair, set both hands on my knees, and looked at the speaker. "Play it," I said. The recording began with the sound of a drawer opening, not the living room. The audio timestamp placed this segment at 12:44 in the morning, which meant Evelyn had waited until she was certain I was asleep before moving through the house. The acoustic quality of the recording shifted slightly in this segment. A narrower sound, less ambient room noise, which Marcus explained, meant she had moved into the kitchen, where the ceiling was lower and the walls closer together. Her voice was different at 12:44. The careful social register she maintained throughout the day, the modulated warmth, the practiced consideration, all of it was gone. What remained was something I could only describe as operational. She was not performing for anyone. She was working. "It needs to move faster," she said, without greeting. "The bank delay is going to prompt questions if it extends past Thursday. Richard is not as distracted as I told you. He asked me tonight whether I was happy." A pause. That is not the question of a distracted man. The voice on the other end of the call was not Daniel's. It was older male, careful in a different way, the carefulness of someone who understood exactly how much trouble the conversation they were having could cause them. Victor Collins said, "The evaluation is complete. I submitted the final documentation to the courier this afternoon. It will reach the filing attorney by 10 tomorrow morning." "And the language around the cognitive assessment," Evelyn said. "It reflects the collision injury. It reflects a pattern of cognitive decline consistent with moderate traumatic brain injury sustained in a motor vehicle accident approximately 20 months ago," Collins said. "The timeline is medically plausible. The conclusions are unambiguous. Any judge reviewing it will see exactly what we need them to see." Marcus stopped the playback. The silence in his office had a different quality from the silence 4 seconds ago. That silence had been shock. This one was something colder and more purposeful, the silence of two men who have just heard exactly what they needed to hear and are now deciding what to do with it. I looked at Marcus. He submitted documents to a filing attorney last night. Shakita, which means the conservatorship petition could reach the court clerk as early as this morning. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. "We need to move today, not Thursday." He made 3 calls in the next 9 minutes. I sat across from him and listened to each one. The first was to the federal contact he had mentioned 2 days ago, a financial crimes investigator named Hendricks at the Houston field office. Marcus outlined the Collins recording in precise terms, cited the relevant federal statutes, and confirmed that the audio file was available for immediate transfer to the investigator's secure server. Hendricks asked 2 questions, and then said the warrant application for the Albuquerque residence would be expedited to within 24 hours. The second call was to the Davidson County Records Office, which Marcus corrected immediately to the Harris County District Clerk, to request an emergency flag on any conservatorship filing submitted under Richard Hayes as the subject. If the filing arrived, it would be held for judicial review rather than processed automatically. The third call was to a neurologist named Dr. Patricia Owens at Houston Methodist Hospital, whom Marcus described as board-certified with 30 years of clinical experience and no professional relationship with anyone connected to this matter. He scheduled an emergency cognitive evaluation for me at 2 o'clock that afternoon. An independent assessment completed by a credentialed physician before the petition reached a judge would directly contradict Collins's fabricated conclusions. When the third call ended, Marcus set his phone on the desk and looked at me. The Collins documentation establishes 3 separate criminal exposures, he said, opening the third folder from our earlier session and adding 2 new pages to it. First, falsification of a legal document, specifically a death certificate under Texas Health and Safety Code, Section 166. Second, federal insurance fraud under 18 United States Code, Section 1347, relating to the $8 million payout Evelyn received following the fraudulent death certification. Third, submission of a false medical evaluation to a court of law, which constitutes fraud upon the court and obstruction of justice under federal statute. He aligned the new pages with the existing documents and closed the folder. Victor Collins, he said, has not practiced medicine in 9 years. He has been living on the payments Evelyn made through VPC Medical Advisory Services and whatever savings he accumulated prior to his retirement. The money stopped 2 years ago when Evelyn's personal accounts were depleted. He has been waiting for this final payment, which he will not receive, I said. Which he will not receive, Marcus confirmed. I stood and walked to the window. 14 floors below, a delivery driver was arguing with a parking enforcement officer beside a double-parked truck, gesturing at a clipboard with the particular frustration of someone who believes the rules are being applied unfairly to them specifically. An ordinary Wednesday morning grievance on an ordinary Wednesday morning street. There is one more thing, Marcus said from behind me. I turned. He had opened his briefcase and removed a manila envelope which he placed on the desk between us. When the investigators searched the courier records this morning to locate the Collins submission, they cross-referenced the filing attorney's address. He pushed the envelope toward me. The attorney Evelyn retained for the conservatorship petition is based in Galveston, the same city where you own a beach house, the same city where the realtor she spoke to last month operates. I picked up the envelope, but did not open it. She was liquidating everything simultaneously, I said. Everything simultaneously, Marcus confirmed. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Veronica Shaw at First Lone Star Bank. 4 sentences that rearranged the timeline we had been working with. Mrs. Hayes called the branch 20 minutes ago. She is coming in this afternoon to follow up on the transfer. She said she has additional documentation. She asked for a 2 o'clock appointment. 2 o'clock. The same time as my neurological evaluation at Houston Methodist. I set the phone down and looked at Marcus. We need to move everything up, I said. Marcus was already reaching for his phone again. I know, he said. I left Marcus's office at 11:20 and drove west on Dallas Street without a particular destination in mind, which was how I ended up turning onto Shepherd Drive 20 minutes later and pulling into the parking lot of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The church was a low limestone building set back from the street behind a row of live oak trees that were older than the neighborhood surrounding them. I had been coming here for 15 years first with Evelyn on Easter and Christmas, when we still observed those occasions together, then alone after Daniel died. Then, with increasing regularity over the past decade, as the Sunday services became one of the few fixed points in a life that had quietly lost most of its other anchors. The parking lot was empty, except for Pastor Glenn Howard's green pickup truck, parked in its usual spot near the side entrance. Glenn drove the same truck he had driven for 11 years, a fact I had always found reassuring, without being able to explain why. Some people are most themselves in their consistencies. I found him in the fellowship hall behind the sanctuary, arranging folding chairs into rows for what I assumed was an evening meeting of some kind. He was 65 years old, built lean and unhurried with gray hair cut close, and the kind of face that had settled deeply into itself over decades of listening to people describe their worst moments. He looked up when I came through the door and set down the chair he was holding without making a production of it. "Richard," he said. "Glenn." I looked at the rows of half-arranged chairs. "I can come back." "You drove here in the middle of a Wednesday," he said. "Sit down." We sat in two of the folding chairs near the window that looked out onto the small memorial garden the congregation had planted 3 years ago. A stone bench, a dogwood tree, a small plaque on the ground that I had helped fund but never read closely enough to remember what it said. Glenn waited. He was exceptionally good at waiting. It was the quality I valued most in him, the absolute absence of the impulse to fill silence with something that would make the listener feel better at the expense of the truth. 8 years ago, I said, when Daniel died. You stood at that graveside and read from John, and you held the service together when I could not hold anything together myself. I looked at my hands, which were resting open on my knees. I need to tell you something about that day that I only found out 2 days ago. I told him. Not everything, not the legal architecture, not the financial specifics, but the shape of it. The phone call from Veronica, the man at the bank counter, the recording device and what it captured at 12:44 in the morning. I told him about the photograph replaced by a $12 print from a home goods store. I told him about the letter that Marcus's investigator had found in the drawer of the Caldwell Tower apartment, a detail that had come through in a preliminary report that morning, a handwritten letter Daniel had apparently drafted 7 years ago and never sent. Glenn listened to all of it with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the memorial garden outside the window. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for the right thing to say. The quiet of someone making sure the person across from them has actually finished before responding. "The letter," he said. "You said Daniel wrote it 7 years ago. He wanted to tell you the truth. According to the report," I said. "I have not seen it yet. Marcus is holding it until the investigators clear the apartment." Glenn nodded slowly. So there was a moment when he considered coming back. "There was a moment," I said. "Apparently it did not last." Glenn looked at me directly. "How are you carrying this, Richard, not the legal side? The other part?" I thought about the question honestly, which was the only way Glenn had ever accepted answers in 15 years of knowing each other. "I do not know yet," I said. "I keep waiting to feel something I recognize. Grief or rage or something with a name. What I mostly feel is a kind of clarity I am not sure I earned." "Clarity is not something you earn," Glenn said. "It arrives when it arrives. Usually after something takes away everything that was obscuring it." Outside the window, a sparrow landed on the stone bench in the memorial garden, sat for 3 seconds, and flew away. When this is over, Glenn said, what do you want? I had thought about this in the car on the way here and in Marcus's office, and in the sleepless hours of Tuesday night, lying beside a woman whose plans for my future included a private room in a facility in Pearland. I had thought about it in the parking lot of a closed hardware store on Monday night, and at a corner table in Brennan's with a glass of bourbon I had barely touched. Peace, I said. Not justice, not resolution, just quiet. Glenn placed one hand briefly on my forearm. Then that is what you are working toward, he said. Everything else is the path to it. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I took it out and looked at the screen. Tommy. The text message read, he just left the building. Rolling suitcase. Headed toward the parking structure on the south end of Elgin. I stood up from the folding chair. I have to go. Glenn stood with me. He did not ask what the message said. He simply extended his hand, and and the handshake lasted a moment longer than handshakes usually do, the way they do between two people who understand that the next time they see each other, something will have changed permanently. I will be here, Glenn said. I know, I said. That has always been the thing about you, Glenn. You are always here. I walked back through the sanctuary and out into the October afternoon. The live oaks along Shepherd Drive were holding the last of their leaves, going amber at the edges a week or two from letting go entirely. I got in my car and called Tommy. Which direction? I said. South on Elgin, Tommy said. Moving fast. He has got a rolling suitcase, Mr. Hayes. The kind people bring to airports. Tommy was 2 blocks behind Daniel on Elgin Avenue when I reached him by phone, close enough to maintain visual contact, but far enough back that a man checking his surroundings would not register the same gray sedan twice in the same stretch of road. Tommy had spent 20 years navigating Houston traffic on behalf of other people. He knew how to be present without being seen. He turned south on Travis. Tommy said, his voice carrying the focused calm of someone dividing their attention between driving and reporting. Rolling the suitcase on the sidewalk, medium-size hard-shell black, moving at a steady pace, not rushed, but deliberate. A man who knows where he is going. Stay with him, I said. I was already moving toward my own car in the St. Paul's parking lot, phone pressed to my ear. Do not close the distance. If he stops, you stop. Understood. I pulled out of the parking lot onto Shepherd Drive and headed south, running parallel to Tommy's position 2 streets over. The afternoon had turned overcast, the pale blue sky of the morning replaced by a flat gray ceiling that sat low over the Houston skyline and made the city look compressed. Everything pushed closer to the ground than it actually was. Tommy came back on the line 4 minutes later. He stopped, he said. Corner of Travis and Capitol. He is looking at his phone. A pause. He is checking something, a map or a schedule. Now he is moving again, heading east on Capitol. East on Capitol. I knew that stretch of road. The Greyhound bus station sat 3 blocks east of the intersection of Capitol and Main, a squat concrete building that had occupied the same corner since the 1970s and showed no particular interest in updating itself. Tommy, I said. Is he heading toward the bus station? A 10-second pause. Yes, sir, I believe he is. I pressed the accelerator harder and took the next left to cut across toward Main Street. The traffic signal at the intersection was red, and I sat behind 2 cars with my hand resting on the steering wheel and my eyes on the dashboard clock. 12:47 in the afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus sent while I was on the call with Tommy. 2 sentences. Hendricks moved the warrant application to emergency status. Judge is reviewing now. The light changed. I moved through the intersection and turned east. Tommy called back at 12:53. "He is inside," he said. "I parked on Commerce and walked to the corner. I can see through the front window from here. He is at the ticket counter. Can you read the destination board from where you are standing?" "Negative. Too much reflection on the glass." A pause. "He is paying now. Cash." He pulled bills from his front jacket pocket, not a wallet. Another pause, longer this time. "He is done at the counter. He is moving toward the waiting area. He has got a ticket in his hand. I parked on Fannin Street and walked the remaining block to Commerce on foot." Tommy was standing at the corner of Commerce and Main with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at his own phone with the practiced disinterest of a man waiting for someone who is running late. I came up beside him without making a production of it. "Third row of seats from the left," Tommy said without looking up from his phone. Gray jacket cap still on suitcase between his feet. I looked through the plate glass window of the bus station. Daniel was sitting in a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees and his head slightly bowed, the posture of a man in a waiting room who wants to occupy as little visual space as possible. The rolling suitcase stood upright between his feet. He was looking at his phone with the focused attention of someone reading something important or pretending to. He had my chin. Even from this distance, at this angle through a plate glass window in flat afternoon light, the line of his jaw was mine. I had looked at that jaw in the mirror every morning for 68 years in one form or another, and there was no distance and no light condition that would make me fail to recognize it. I watched him for 30 seconds. He did not look up. I thought about the summer he was 7 years old, and I spent a Saturday afternoon in the driveway teaching him to ride a bicycle without training wheels. He had fallen 4 times and gotten up 4 times without being asked to, and on the 5th attempt, he had ridden the full length of the driveway and turned around and ridden back. And the expression on his face in that moment was the purest thing I had ever seen on another human being. Absolute, unguarded joy at having done something he had not believed he could do. I turned away from the window. "What does the departure board say?" I asked Tommy. He looked up toward the board visible through a different section of the window. "Next departure 1:45, San Antonio." San Antonio. 4 hours by bus. A city large enough to disappear into with connections to Laredo and the border if a man needed to go further than 4 hours. I called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said. "Tommy texted me 20 seconds ago." "Can we move to tomorrow morning?" I asked. "Not Thursday afternoon, tomorrow morning, early." Marcus was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "The warrant for Collins is still pending. If we move on Daniel and Evelyn before Collins is secured, he has a time to destroy evidence in Albuquerque." "How long for Hendricks?" "He said the judge is reviewing. That means 1 hour, possibly 2. I looked at my watch. 1:14 in the afternoon. "The 1:45 bus," I said. "If that bus leaves this station with Daniel on it, how long before we can locate him in San Antonio?" Marcus exhaled. "Long enough for him to transfer to another route." I watched through the window as Daniel shifted in his seat and pulled his cap lower over his eyes. Around him, the waiting room held a dozen other passengers, ordinary people, with ordinary reasons for traveling on a Wednesday afternoon, none of them aware that the man in the gray jacket in the 3rd row was sitting inside a legal perimeter that was contracting around him by the hour. "Pull him off the bus," I said. "Whatever you need to do. I do not want that bus leaving." "I will call Hendricks right now," Marcus said. "Richard." A pause. "The warrant just came through. Collins is being served in Albuquerque as of 2 minutes ago." I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed out slowly. "Then we move tonight," I said. "6 o'clock tomorrow morning." 6 o'clock, Marcus confirmed. "I will have everything in place." I ended the call and stood on the corner of Commerce and Main with Tommy beside me and watched Daniel through the plate glass window of the Greyhound station, sitting with his suitcase between his feet and a bus ticket in his jacket pocket, and no idea at all that the perimeter had just closed. I did not sleep on Wednesday night either. I lay in the dark beside Evelyn for the second night in a row and listened to her breathe with the slow, undisturbed regularity of someone who had no difficulty sleeping at all. Her breathing had always been like that even in the early years of our marriage, when I was the one lying awake reviewing freight schedules and quarterly projections. I used to find it comforting, the steadiness of her beside me. I used to think it meant she felt safe. I understood now what it actually meant. It meant she had nothing unresolved, nothing she had not already accounted for. At 4:30, I got up without making noise, dressed in the bathroom, with the door closed, and went downstairs. The house was the particular kind of quiet that only exists in the hours before dawn, when even the street outside has gone still, and the world has not yet remembered that it is supposed to be in motion. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched the coffee brew and did not think about anything specific, which was not the same as not thinking. It was the mind doing the thing it does when it has processed everything available to it and is simply holding itself in readiness for what comes next. I sat at the kitchen table with my first cup and looked at the calendar on the wall. Evelyn's handwriting filled every relevant square, appointments and reminders and the small administrative notations of a shared life that looked from a distance like evidence of order and care. I had looked at that calendar every morning for 22 years and understood it as exactly what it appeared to be. I understood it differently now. Every entry in her handwriting was a performance of normalcy. The calendar was not a record of a life. It was a prop in a production that had been running for 8 years. At 5:15, I went upstairs to the walk-in closet and took down the charcoal suit. It was the suit I wore to contract signings and board presentations, the one that Silas at the dry cleaner on Westheimer always pressed with a crease sharp enough to cut paper. He had been pressing that suit for 14 years, and he always had it ready by Tuesday afternoon without being asked, because he had learned my schedule without my ever explaining it. That was the kind of loyalty I understood. Reliable, unspoken, and entirely without agenda. I dressed slowly and with attention, the way I had learned to dress for the most important meetings of my career when I was young enough to still believe that the care you put into your appearance communicated something real about the care you put into your intentions. I was not young anymore. But the belief had held. I buttoned the jacket and stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom for a moment, and looked at the face of a 68-year-old man who had spent 8 years grieving a son who was alive and who was about to spend this particular Thursday morning watching the people responsible for that grief be removed from his house in handcuffs. I went back downstairs and poured a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table again. Marcus called at 5:47. I picked up on the first ring. "Tell me," I said. "We are in position," he said. His voice carried the compressed efficiency of a man who had been awake since before I had, and was operating on the clean fuel of professional focus, rather than anything as unreliable as adrenaline. "Hendricks has 2 agents at the Caldwell Tower. 2 officers from Houston PD are with them. They have the warrant, and they are waiting on my signal." A pause of exactly 1 second. "The second team is at this address. 4 officers. They will approach the front door at 6 o'clock precisely." "And Collins," I said. "An Albuquerque field office confirmed last night that the search of his residence is complete." Marcus paused. They recovered the original case file from Daniel's accident, physical documents. Collins had retained them for 8 years, Richard. A man does not keep documents like that for 8 years unless he understands that they represent the only leverage he has. Another pause. They also recovered a personal laptop containing correspondence between Collins and Evelyn, dating to July of 2017. 4 months before the accident. I set my coffee cup on the table. 4 months before the accident. Which meant the planning had begun 4 months before Daniel's car went off the rain-slicked overpass in Katy, Texas, on a Thursday night in November. Which meant that while Daniel was still living in this house, still appearing at Sunday dinners, with the particular manufactured ease of someone performing the role of a son, still borrowing my copy of the Wall Street Journal from the front porch every morning, because he claimed the paper version read differently than the digital one. Evelyn and Victor Collins had already been corresponding about what Collins would need to do and when he would need to do it. Richard, Marcus said. I am here, I said. There is one more thing? His pause this time was slightly longer than his pauses usually were, which was the closest thing to hesitation that Marcus Webb ever permitted himself. The investigators cleared the Caldwell Tower apartment last night after Daniel was detained at the bus station. They cataloged the contents room by room. Another pause. In the top drawer of the desk in the bedroom they found an envelope, handwritten, addressed to you by name. I did not say anything. They photographed it as part of the evidence catalog, Marcus continued. The letter inside is in Daniel's handwriting. The investigators dated it approximately 7 years ago based on the paper stock and the oxidation pattern of the ink. That would place it at roughly a year after the accident. He stopped. I am going to read you the first 2 paragraphs. Tell me when you want me to stop. Go ahead, I said. Marcus cleared his throat. In 18 years of working together, I had never heard him do that before. Not once. Not before a deposition, not before a federal mediation, not before the 2 occasions when he had delivered genuinely catastrophic news to me across his desk. He cleared his throat, and then he read, Dear Dad, I have started this letter 11 times and thrown away 10 versions of it. I do not know how to say what I need to say in a way that does not sound like I am asking for something, because I am not asking for anything. I gave up the right to ask you for anything a long time ago. What I want to do is tell you the truth, which is that I am alive, and that I have known every day for the past year that what I did to you is the worst thing one person can do to another, which is make them grieve something that does not exist. Marcus paused. I did not tell him to stop. I am not going to tell you that I was pressured, or that I did not understand what I was agreeing to. I understood. I agreed because I was afraid, and because I owed money to people I did not want to owe money to, and because I told myself that disappearing was the same as starting over, which I now know is the kind of thing a coward tells himself to make a cowardly decision feel like a reasonable one. I am sorry, Dad. I know that is not enough. I know there is probably no version of enough. But I needed to write it down at least once, even if I never send this, because carrying it without writing it down has become something I cannot continue to do. Marcus stopped reading. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the sky was still the particular thick dark of 5:50 in the morning in October, when sunrise is still 40 minutes away, and the neighborhood has not yet begun its daily process of waking itself up. The coffee maker had finished its cycle. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere above me in the bedroom where I had spent the past 2 nights lying awake beside a woman I no longer recognized, a floorboard settled with a faint creak. The envelope, I said. My voice came out level. The outside of it. Yes, Marcus said. He knew what I was going to ask. He had known before I asked it. Is there anything written on it? On the back. A pause. The investigators noted a single word written in a different hand on the back of the envelope. A different pen, different pressure. The handwriting analysis is preliminary, but the assessment is consistent with Evelyn's known handwriting samples. He stopped. Richard, it says no. One word. Written on the back of the only honest thing my son had produced in 8 years of living 12 miles away from the father he had allowed to grieve him. One word in Evelyn's handwriting that had kept that letter in a desk drawer for 7 years, instead of reaching the hands it was addressed to. One word that told me everything I needed to know about the difference between the woman I had married and the woman I had been living beside. Daniel had tried once to come back, and she had closed the door on it with a single syllable and filed the evidence away where it would not inconvenience the plan. I pressed both palms flat on the surface of the kitchen table and looked at the window. The darkness outside was beginning to show the first thin suggestion of gray along the eastern edge of the sky. The way October mornings in Houston always began reluctantly, as though the night understood it was losing something it could not recover. "Marcus," I said, "it is almost time." "It is," he said. "Are you ready?" I thought about the question for exactly as long as it deserved. I thought about 8 years of white flowers on a Tuesday morning. I thought about a November graveside in a black overcoat and a rose I could not drop for 11 minutes. I thought about a man I had believed I was until Monday afternoon, and the man I had been required to become since then. I thought about a letter in a desk drawer with one word on the back of the envelope in my wife's handwriting. I stood up from the kitchen table and straightened my jacket and carried my coffee cup to the sink. I rinsed it under the tap and set it in the drying rack and turned off the kitchen light. "I have been ready since Monday afternoon," I said. I walked to the front door and opened it. The October morning air came in cool and carrying the particular smell of Houston, at that hour exhaust fading from the night before, and something green underneath it, and the faint mineral trace of the bayou 2 streets over. I stepped out onto the front step and pulled the door shut behind me. The street was quiet and still and completely ordinary in the way that streets are in the final moments before something happens that will make them permanently different in the memory of the person who was standing on them when it did. I stood on that step and breathed the October air and waited. 30 seconds later, I heard the sound of cars turning onto our street. The first car turned onto our street at 6 o'clock and 2 seconds. I was standing on the front step with my jacket buttoned and my hands at my sides when the headlights swept across the front of the house. 2 unmarked sedans followed by a Houston PD patrol unit, moving at the deliberate pace of vehicles that have no need to announce themselves, because the element of surprise has already been accounted for in the planning. They pulled to the curb in a sequence that suggested coordination, the kind of choreography that comes from people who have done this enough times to stop thinking about the individual steps. Hendricks got out of the first car. I recognized him from the description Marcus had given me, tall and rangy in a dark jacket, carrying himself with the contained energy of someone who had been awake since before I had, and was not particularly bothered by it. He walked up the front path with 2 agents behind him, and 4 Houston PD officers fanning out to cover the perimeter of the house. He stopped 2 feet from where I was standing. "Mr. Hayes." "Agent Hendricks." He looked at me for a moment, with the evaluating directness of someone whose profession required him to read people quickly and accurately. "You should step back inside the entryway," he said. "This will take a few minutes." I stepped back. He rang the bell. The sound of the doorbell inside the house was something I had heard thousands of times. It had a particular 2-note chime that Evelyn had chosen when we replaced the old buzzer 12 years ago, a sound she had described at the time as cleaner. Standing in my own entryway at 6 in the morning, listening to it ring from the outside, was an experience for which nothing in 35 years of marriage had prepared me. 15 seconds passed. Then I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the specific rhythm of Evelyn descending slightly heavier on the left foot from an old ankle injury she had carried since her 30s. The footsteps crossed the upstairs hallway, came down the stairs, crossed the entryway tile. The door opened. Evelyn was wearing her robe, her hair not yet arranged for the day, her face carrying the particular expression of composed irritation that well-maintained people deploy when something interrupts their morning routine before they have had the opportunity to fully construct themselves. She took in Hendricks and the agents behind him and the officers at the edge of the porch with a single sweep of her eyes, and for exactly 2 seconds, her face did not change at all. Then she looked past Hendricks and saw me standing in the entryway behind him. The composed irritation did not become panic. It did not become rage or desperation or any of the things a person's face does when the thing they have been afraid of finally arrives. It became something I did not have a precise word for, a kind of absolute stillness, as though every system inside her had simultaneously decided to stop spending energy on performance and redirect it entirely toward assessment. "Evelyn Hayes," Hendricks said in the level, practiced tone of someone reading from an internal script they have memorized to the point of it requiring no effort. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to submit falsified medical documentation to a court of law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Evelyn listened to the Miranda warning the way she listened to everything, with complete surface attention, and whatever was actually happening somewhere several layers below the surface, entirely invisible. When Hendricks finished, she looked at me again. "How long?" she said. Her voice was the same voice she had used at the kitchen counter last night, asking whether I wanted tea, entirely level, entirely controlled, as though the question was a practical one requiring only a factual answer. "Long enough," I said. She held my eyes for 3 seconds. Then she looked away back toward Hendricks and extended her wrists in a gesture so composed that it looked almost like a social offering, the way you extend a hand for a handshake. Hendricks nodded to the agent on his left, who stepped forward with the restraints. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A text from Tommy, 3 words, "Caldwell Tower secure." 30 seconds after that, Marcus called. "Collins taken into custody in Albuquerque at 5:52 this morning local time," he said. "All 3 simultaneously, Richard, everything held." I stood in the entryway of the house I had lived in for 22 years and watched 2 federal agents walk my wife of 35 years down the front path toward the first unmarked sedan. She walked without assistance and without resistance. Her back straight, her chin level, her robe moving around her ankles in the early morning air. She did not look back at the house. She did not look back at me. The patrol car at the curb relayed something on its radio. A neighbor's porch light came on 2 houses down, the particular curiosity of ordinary people encountering something outside the boundaries of their ordinary morning. A dog somewhere on the block began barking at the unfamiliar sounds and then went quiet when they stopped. Marcus was still on the line. "Daniel is being processed at the Caldwell Tower," he said. "They will transfer him to the federal holding facility on Rusk Street within the hour." Rusk Street was 4 miles from our house. 4 miles from the house where I had kept a photograph of my son on a walnut table for 8 years and replaced the flowers beside it every Tuesday morning without fail. I walked out onto the front step and stood in the October morning air. The sky to the east had gone from gray to a pale, washed-out gold, the sun not yet visible, but its approach evident in the way the darkness was retreating from the horizon in long, reluctant bands. Hendricks came back up the path toward me. We will need a statement at some point today, he said. Not right now. This afternoon is fine. This afternoon, I agreed. He looked at me with the same evaluating directness as before. You did this correctly, he said. It was not praise exactly. It was the assessment of a professional recognizing competent work by someone operating outside their usual field. Most people in your situation would have walked through that door at the bank on Monday and ruined 2 years of potential case building in about 45 seconds. I had good counsel, I said. He nodded once and walked back to his car. I stood on the front step alone and watched the 3 vehicles pull away from the curb and move down the street in the same coordinated sequence with which they had arrived. The neighbor's porch light went off. The street returned to its ordinary morning quiet. A mockingbird in the oak tree in the front yard produced 4 different calls in rapid succession, cycling through its repertoire, with the cheerful indifference of a creature that had observed the entire proceeding from 12 feet up and found none of it particularly remarkable. 35 years of marriage ended on a Thursday morning in October, with the sound of 2 car doors closing and an engine turning over and tires on pavement moving away. I went inside to make more coffee. Marcus called at 2:17 in the afternoon, 3 hours after the last of the 3 arrest teams had cleared their respective locations and filed their preliminary reports with the federal prosecutor's office. Come to the office, he said. There is something you need to hear before you give your statement to Hendricks. I had spent the morning sitting at the kitchen table in my charcoal suit, drinking coffee I did not taste and looking at the back door through which Evelyn had walked every day for 22 years. At some point around 9 o'clock, I had gotten up and removed the coastal landscape print from the corner table in the living room and put it in the recycling bin in the garage. I had not replaced it with anything. The space it left was just a space, 2 empty candle holders, and a clean surface of walnut that I had sanded and stained myself in a different life, in a version of this house that no longer existed in any form that I could return to. I drove to Louisiana Street and took the elevator to the 14th floor and sat down across from Marcus without taking off my jacket. He placed a black USB drive on the desk between us. Not the recording device itself, which was now part of the evidence chain, but a copy of the audio file that Marcus had retained through proper legal channels as my attorney of record. This is the segment from 12:44, he said. The portion we heard this morning was the first 11 minutes of that recording. There is a second part that begins at 12:58. He looked at me steadily. 14 minutes later, after Evelyn ended the call with Collins and made a second call, this one to Daniel, I looked at the USB drive on the desk. A small matte black rectangle the size of a thumb containing 14 additional minutes of conversation that had taken place in the living room of my house while I was lying awake in the dark 12 feet overhead. Play it, I said. Marcus connected the drive to his laptop and moved the audio timeline forward. The recording began mid-silence. The ambient sound of the living room at 12:58 in the morning, the faint hum of the refrigerator cycling in the kitchen, the creak of the leather chair as Evelyn shifted her weight. Then the sound of a number being dialed. Daniel picked up on the second ring. Everything good, he said. Collins confirmed, Evelyn said. The filing reaches the attorney tomorrow morning. We are on schedule. A pause. How are you feeling about Thursday? Fine, Daniel said. The word came out flat and without texture, the way people say fine when the question being asked is not really about feelings, and both parties understand that. I booked the San Antonio ticket as backup. If anything moves wrong, I can be on the road in 40 minutes. Nothing is going to move wrong, Evelyn said. The account releases Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, the first tranche is offshore. By Sunday, we are finished. A pause. After that, you can go wherever you want. Properly. Not that apartment. The apartment was your idea, Daniel said. Everything was my idea, Evelyn said. And there was something in the way she said it that was not complaint and not pride, but something in between, the statement of a person who has carried the weight of a plan alone for so long that the acknowledgement of it has stopped feeling like either burden or achievement and has simply become fact. Your father would never have managed any of this. He is a man who builds things and trusts them to stay where he put them. He never learned that the most important question is not how to build, but who is standing next to you while you do. Daniel did not respond to that immediately. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly, a register lower, carrying a quality I could not name precisely. Not remorse, not regret. Something adjacent to both the sound a person's voice makes when they are about to say something true that they have been keeping somewhere uncomfortable for a long time. He taught me to ride a bike, Daniel said. Did you know that one Saturday afternoon in the driveway? He stayed out there with me for 3 hours. I kept falling, and he kept picking the bike up without saying anything about the falling. Just picking it up and handing it back. The room in Marcus's office was absolutely still. Evelyn's voice, when it came, was not unkind. It was something more final than unkind. That was a long time ago, she said. I know, Daniel said. A pause of approximately 4 seconds. Then Daniel's voice again, the register returned to its flat and operational tone. The brief opening closed as cleanly as a door being shut. Once the money moves, what about him, the conservatorship files? The petition is already prepared, Evelyn said. Once the assets transfer, we file within 72 hours. The medical documentation is comprehensive. The court will appoint a guardian within 2 weeks, possibly faster, given the circumstances we have described. Her voice carried the brisk efficiency of a woman reviewing a project timeline. There is a facility in Pearland with an excellent reputation. Private rooms. Good staff. He will be comfortable, and he will be close enough that it does not appear we have abandoned him. And if he fights it, Daniel said. He will not fight it, Evelyn said. He trusts too much and questions too little. He always has. It is the quality that made him good at running a company and completely unprepared for the people around him. A brief pause. It is also the quality that made him easy to love once. That is the honest version. Marcus's hand moved to the spacebar. He stopped the recording. The silence in his office lasted longer than 4 seconds this time. Neither of us counted it. I looked at the window behind Marcus's head. The Houston skyline caught the afternoon light at an angle that made the glass surfaces of the taller buildings look briefly like something other than glass, warmer and less certain, the way things look in the last hour before the light changes completely and the city becomes its nighttime version of itself. She said he was easy to love, I said. Once. Yes, Marcus said. I looked away from the window. That is the most truthful thing she said in 11 minutes of conversation at 12:58 in the morning. I picked up the USB drive from the desk and held it briefly and set it back down. It is also the thing that makes all of it worse somehow, that it started from something real. Marcus did not offer a response to that because it was not the kind of statement that required one. I stood up and buttoned the bottom button of my jacket, which I had let come undone at some point during the afternoon without noticing. I have one thing left to do today, I said. After Hendricks. The statement will take an hour, Marcus said. Possibly less. Hendricks runs an efficient process. After Hendricks, I said. I need to go somewhere alone. Marcus looked at me for a moment. Daniel is at the federal holding facility on Rusk Street, he said. They will allow a brief meeting if you request it through proper channels. I can make a call? Make the call, I said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and walked to the door. At the threshold, I stopped and turned back. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. Marcus, I said. He looked up. 18 years, I said. Thank you. He held my eyes for a moment. Then he nodded once the way Marcus nodded when something mattered to him and he did not intend to say so out loud. I turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard him dial. The federal holding facility on Rusk Street was a building that did not advertise its purpose from the outside. It occupied the middle portion of a block, between two older commercial buildings, a low concrete structure with narrow windows, and an entrance that looked more like the service door of an office building than the front of a federal detention center. I had driven past it hundreds of times over the years, without registering it as anything in particular. It was the kind of building that benefits from people not thinking about what goes on inside it. I gave my name at the front desk at 4:43 in the afternoon. The officer behind the counter checked a list, made a phone call, and told me to wait. I sat in a plastic chair against the wall and looked at the floor, which was a pale, institutional green that had probably seemed like a reasonable color choice to someone at some point, and had been regretting it ever since. Marcus had called ahead. The paperwork was in order. At 5 o'clock, a corrections officer led me down a corridor that smelled of floor cleaner and recycled air and stopped outside a door with a small reinforced window set into it at eye level. 5 minutes, the officer said. I will be outside. I nodded and went in. The room was small and held a single table bolted to the floor with 2 chairs on either side. Daniel was sitting in the chair on the far side, still wearing the gray jacket from the bus station, his wrists resting on the table surface in front of him. The rolling suitcase was gone. His cap was gone. Without it, his face was fully visible in the flat overhead light of the room, and the 8 years that had passed since the funeral were apparent in it in ways that a jacket and a beard and a cap pulled low had obscured from me through a plate glass window on a gray Wednesday afternoon. He looked tired in the particular way of someone who has been running a long time and has finally stopped, not because they chose to stop, but because the ground ran out beneath them. He looked up when I came in. I pulled out the chair on my side of the table and sat down. I did not take off my jacket. I set my hands flat on the table surface and looked at him directly, and he looked back at me. And neither of us said anything for the first several seconds, which was not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people who had too much and no map for where to begin. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hands on the table surface moved slightly, the fingers of his right hand spreading and then closing again. A gesture I recognized from 30 years of watching him manage discomfort. He had done it as a boy when I asked him questions he did not want to answer. He had done it across the desk in my office the afternoon he told me about the money. Some things in a person do not change regardless of what changes around them. "Daddy," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "I know there is nothing I can say that." I reached into my jacket's inner pocket and took out an envelope. It was a photocopy, the original being held as evidence. But Marcus had arranged for a clean reproduction on standard paper, folded once, placed in a plain white envelope with no writing on the outside. I set it on the table between us and slid it across until it stopped in front of Daniel's hands. He looked down at it. I watched his face as he recognized the paper, the weight of it, the particular way it sat on the table surface. His eyes moved to the fold, to the edges of the envelope, and something shifted in them that I could not have named precisely, but that I had seen once before on the face of a 7-year-old boy at the end of a driveway on a Saturday afternoon, when he finally did the thing he had been afraid he could not do. Not joy this time. The structural opposite of joy. But the same unguardedness underneath the same face behind the face that people show when something reaches them below the level where performance is possible. His right hand moved toward the envelope and stopped 2 inches from it. "Where did you find it?" he said. Not a question. The statement of a person who already knows the answer and needs a moment before they can absorb what the answer means. I did not respond. I looked at my son's hands on that table at the gray jacket he had bought under a false name, with money that had come from the grief of a man who thought he was funding a memorial. And I held everything I was feeling in the place where I had learned to hold things that were too large to process in the time available, which was a place I had built quietly over 68 years without ever having intended to build it. Then I stood up. I pushed the chair back, straightened my jacket, and looked at Daniel one final time. His eyes came up from the envelope to my face, and for a moment, we were just 2 people in a small room in a building on Rusk Street on a Thursday afternoon in October, a father and a son, with 8 years of silence between them and a piece of paper on a table that said everything the silence had not. I turned and walked to the door and knocked twice. The corrections officer opened it from the outside. I walked back down the corridor that smelled of floor cleaner and through the waiting area with the institutional green floor, and out through the front entrance into the October afternoon. And I did not look back at any point because there was nothing behind me that looking back would change. Pastor Glenn was leaning against his green pickup truck in the parking lot across the street. His hands in the pockets of his jacket, watching the entrance of the building with the patient stillness of a man who has spent 40 years being present in the difficult moments of other people's lives, and has made his peace with the fact that presence is sometimes the entirety of what is needed. He straightened when he saw me come out. I crossed the street and stood beside him. And neither of us spoke for a moment, which was fine because Glenn understood that some silences are not problems to be solved, but spaces that need to exist before the next thing can begin. "How do you feel?" he said finally. I looked up at the sky over Houston, which had gone the particular deep blue of a Texas evening in autumn, the kind of blue that exists for approximately 20 minutes between the end of the afternoon light and the arrival of the dark, and that I had always thought was the most honest color the sky ever produced, too brief to be taken for granted, and too clear to be misread. "Like something is over," I said. Glenn nodded. "That is exactly what it is," he said. We stood there for another minute, the 2 of us in the parking lot across from the federal holding facility on Rusk Street, while Houston moved around us in its ordinary Thursday evening way, cars and voices and the distant sound of a train somewhere to the south, all of it continuing without reference to what had just concluded in a small room 40 feet above the sidewalk. Then Glenn said, "You want to get some coffee?" I thought about the kitchen table I had sat at alone that morning. I thought about the walnut table in the corner of the living room with its 2 empty candle holders and its clean, bare surface. I thought about a driveway on a Saturday afternoon 30 years ago, and a boy on a bicycle and 3 hours that had apparently meant more to both of us than either of us had said at the time. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." We got into Glenn's truck, and he pulled out of the parking lot, and we drove away from Rusk Street in the direction of a city that was already becoming in the ordinary way of cities and of lives, something slightly different from what it had been the day before. I did not win anything that Thursday. I just finally stopped losing. I have told you this grandpa stories because I believe some truths are only earned through loss. I am not a wise man. I am a man who trusted too completely, watched too little, and spent 8 years placing flowers beside an empty grief. Do not be like me. Pay attention to the people sitting across from you at dinner, not to their words, to what their hands do when they think you are not watching. I have my own opinion about all of this. Greed dressed in love's clothing is the most dangerous thing a family can produce. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. Presence does not guarantee honesty. And a quiet house is not always a peaceful one. This is one of the most painful family story chapters a man can live through. But I walked out of that holding facility lighter than I had walked into anything in 8 years. God reminded me that morning, through the October sky breaking open above Houston, that clarity is a gift given only after something heavy is finally set down. If this grandpa story's reached something in, you leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done differently. Share this family story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these grandpa stories deserve to continue, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. The story you just heard contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If this kind of content is not for you, we respect that completely. Feel free to explore other stories that serve you better.